We tend to view our choices as binary. They're not. The solution almost always lies somewhere in between.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
When Ralph and I first met, he had been working for the same corporation for over 20 years. Over those 20 years, he had slowly moved up the corporate ladder and established himself as an A player within the organization. He had a lot of responsibility, he earned a lot of money for it, and he liked the adulation that he got from his coworkers as being the go-to guy to get the things done. When he and I talked, however, he was also very burned out and a little depressed. He was resigned that he was going to have to trudge it out doing these 60-hour weeks, traveling across the world for at least another 10 years before he was going to, quote-unquote, be able to retire. Beautiful wife, beautiful children, who understood his schedule and accepted that was how life was for Ralph in the role at the corporation. But they missed him, and he missed them, and he felt that he was neglecting them in some way, not being there, even though he knew he was bringing home the bacon and saving up the money to pay for college and ultimately be able to retire in 10 years. Ralph suffered from binary thinking. Either you're all in with the corporation or the law practice or the medical practice, or you are retired. That there was no in between. And he thought that he had to be all in until he was all out. And those were the only options, and how he created his life and lived his life. It's not that way. And that type of thinking can literally make you miss the only life that you have. Because when you're ready to be all out, because you finally feel secure enough, your kids are going to be grown up, your wife is going to have interests outside of you. And if in some cases, your husband or your wife, if you've neglected them enough, it may blow up the marriage once you get home. It's not an all in or all out proposition. There's a lot of in between. And the secret to building a great life and building a great retirement is figuring out what those solutions are in between work and retirement. I'll go even further. The solution to the quote unquote retirement crisis is in between those two choices. The first step, if you want to start taking this journey of thinking in between and not thinking in such a binary way, is really to identify who you are and what you want to live by. Now, I had a podcast a couple months ago on my core values, my top 10 core values. I had some coaches that made me do this, and it was very powerful because it was very evident when I wasn't living in congruence with those values. So I want to invite you to do that again. And if you go to rogerwhitney.com/blog, I talk about the 10 core values I have, and I share again that worksheet that I mentioned at the time that will help you go through identifying your core values. By doing this, you're going to take the first step, just like Ralph did. Many years later, he's doing pretty well. You're going to take the first step to identifying what principles you want to live by. And that's going to be the first step in helping you realize whether you're living in congruence with the values you say you value most. So go to rogerwhitney.com/blog to get that information, and go ahead and leave some comments. We've started to have some great discussions there, and that might help you as well. Now, before we get on with the show, we need to have that all-important disclaimer. That's right. Time for that all-important disclaimer. Real simple here. Think of this as helpful hints and education. I don't know a thing about you. I'm not going to give you any advice. I only give advice to clients I work for as a fiduciary, and that ain't you because I don't know you, and you shouldn't take advice from me because you don't know that much about me anyway. So before you make any decisions, make sure you talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor. And if you're not getting the advice you need and feeling like you're getting fiduciary advice, go to rogerwhitney.com and figure out how we can have a conversation. Email me and we can set up a time to see maybe we're a fit to work together. But until that time, let's get on with the show in our hot topics. Well, in the news today, retirement savings are at an all-time high. Hurrah! The retirement crisis is over. According to Fidelity Investments, this is reported by the USA Today. I'll have a link to it in 6 Shot Saturday. According to Fidelity Investments, the balance of 401k plans has hit an all-time high. This is the average balance of $92,500 per year. The average contribution rate to these 401k plans in the fourth quarter last year were 8.4% of someone's income. This is the highest since the second quarter of 2008, according to Fidelity. Customers or 401k participants stepped up their savings last year more than ever. Ken Berry, president of Fidelity's Workplace Investing, says, "This shows people are taking the right steps towards reaching their retirement savings goals." In fact, national data reflects the same trend. 401k plan assets in the U.S. hit a record $4.8 trillion. And IRA assets hit a record of $7.8 trillion, according to the Investment Company Institute. Hey, we got people saving. We got record high retirement savings. All right. What do you think about that? If that's the case, why do we still have a retirement crisis? Why are we still not saving enough? My view on this is, number one, saving and investing is only part of the overall retirement solution. If it's only a savings and investing equation, as most financial planning and articles tell you, we're never going to be fine because we're living way too long. We're going to be spending too much because we're more active and inflation is going to eat our lunch, and we're going to be more at risk to markets because we don't have pensions for the most part, and Social Security, although important, isn't enough to fill the gap. So this is great that savings are at an all-time high of 8.4% of income. It doesn't matter if it gets to 18 or 20% of income. It's still not going to be enough for most anyone to be able to retire comfortably and confidently. So we need to get beyond saving or not saving, that binary choice, and start to look at solutions that are in between where we can maintain control over our lives. And I've talked about those kind of solutions over and over on the show, and we'll continue to do that. In fact, the book that just shipped talks a lot about the in-between and where we can find those solutions. One other interesting thing I saw from that article is that savings hit a high of 8.4% of income, and that was high since the second quarter of 2008, which doesn't surprise me, but it is sort of surprising. It's sad in that when markets go down, people stop saving in the markets. They don't want to buy low because they're pessimistic about the future. And then after the markets recover, we up our savings rate again so we can buy high. That is one reason why a lot of people need an advisor so they can maintain discipline through good and bad markets. But even advisors, for the most part, will help people do that. And we don't like to buy low. It's just a weird thing with the market, and it's the way that we're wired, I guess. So this is good news that savings is an all-time high, but I'm here to tell you it's never going to be enough because it's only part of the solution given the demographics and how people are living in retirement. But for today, we're going to focus on Kim and Joe because we finished up our conversations with them and we're just waiting for this results webinar. So before we do that, let's have some questions and comments that you've sent in regarding the case study that we've been going through. Well, welcome to the Practical Planning segment. What we're going to do today is just go over some comments from some fellow listeners about Kim and Joe's case study and see if I can answer those questions, and we can start to talk about how it looks so far and whether we think they're going to be able to achieve this ideal retirement that we've been going through. So let's go to the first question. The first question is from Michael, and Michael said, "Did you ever reveal their annual income?" And I believe I did, Michael, but to give it to you, it's about $150,000 a year that Joe makes in his current profession. So that's their annual income is $150,000 a year. Your second question is, did you talk about healthcare? Because the ideal retirement is Joe is looking at retiring, well, today at age 55. And what about healthcare prior to Medicare? And we did address that, Michael. We assumed that it was $5,000 a year in premium for each of them. So $10,000 total, and then we added on some out-of-pocket expenses. Where did we get that number? Well, we swagged it. We did a sophisticated, wildly awesome guess because we really don't have any visibility on where healthcare premiums are going to be or what even the plans are going to be offered. We didn't really understand under the Affordable Care Act, and now we don't know what's going to happen with repeal in place, but we think that's a fairly reasonable assumption as a placeholder. And then lastly, you asked, what are you doing in terms of college costs for their son? And that is also a very good question. We chose within the plan not to address that just for simplicity's sake, because we want to make sure we focus on, during the webinar, on solving the retirement issue and not the college issue. Now, obviously, behind the scenes, when I give Joe and Kim their specific plan that's not altered for public view, we'll make sure that we address that. So our next question comes from Cynthia, and it's really an observation. So I'm just going to read Cynthia's observation. Cynthia says, I'm concerned for them, though, regarding the feasibility of early retirement. My husband and I would never consider retiring with their balance sheet. Sounds like the husband has been doing the heavy lifting to accumulate their wealth, and he feels trapped and spent. That's frightening to risk wearing him out and losing him. I hope they can enjoy a long and healthy and happy retirement. Well, Cynthia, here are some thoughts on that. First off, is he the one working for the income currently? Yes, he is. But I wouldn't go as far as to characterize he's doing all of the heavy lifting. You know, I look at my wife and I over the last 26 years. There's been periods of time where each of us has earned more than the other. And even when she was at home, it was a joint effort. So I think there's always a lot of heavy lifting going on in managing all sides of the equation. But I get your point there. Now, in terms of your comment about him feeling trapped, I tend to agree with that. Now, whether it's specific for Joe or not, I feel many of us feel trapped in career mode, especially as we get into our 50s, because we've been moved up the corporate ladder or up the medical practice or the law practice, and we've built a career typically by our 50s where we are highly trained, we're valued, and that value has a pretty good price in the marketplace, and we're moving. We're working really hard, but we've already walked a very long journey in that particular career, and it feels like you're trapped. That's about the time people start thinking, man, how much longer am I going to have to run so hard? And that can manifest itself in not playing the corporate games or getting tired of the corporate games. It can manifest itself in checking out a little bit. It can manifest itself in just working even harder to move up because that's all you've ever known, and we get intoxicated with the success that we have. But in our 50s, it's very, especially our late 50s, it's very common to say, man, I don't want to run this hard anymore. And I think that feeling, a lot of times we don't know what to do with because we still think in binary terms. And right now, the way it's working, we're looking at a binary solution for Joe and Kim. Joe retires, or he keeps working. Maybe we'll have to play around with something in between. But that binary thinking definitely is something that makes us feel trapped because we don't feel we have any other options. And a lot of times we do. So our next question comes from Ken, and this is an important topic, I think. Ken has an observation about how we discuss Social Security. So here's his comment. He says, Kim thought that the amount that she would receive from Social Security would increase slightly from the estimated amount shown on her annual Social Security statement. And Ken correctly points out, for that number to be true, Social Security assumes that you will continue to earn an equivalent amount right up until the full retirement age. And then he goes on to say, it's just my observation, but I noticed on my Social Security statement that the expected monthly payment decreased slightly since I reported my last income in 2005, and when my income in 2005 decreased dramatically because he left full-time work. He said he thought he had paid the max FICA tax for 24 of his 48-year work history, and he expected his Social Security monthly payment to be the same, but actually it looks like it's going to decrease as he gets closer to full retirement age. Now, he says it's not much. It's about $33 per month. But for those who retire substantially early, he says, and do not earn income, it could be as much as $100 to $200 per month off of what their official statement says. That's a great point, Ken, in that official Social Security statement, one of the assumptions is that you earn roughly what you're earning until that full retirement date, and that's what that number is based off of. So if you look at the Social Security website, here's what they have to say about that. If you stop working before age retirement, here's what could happen. Your retirement benefit is based off the highest 35 years of earnings and your age when you start receiving benefits. So if you stop working before you have 35 years of earnings, they're going to show a 0 for each additional year without earnings, and then they'll use that to determine the amount of your retirement benefits at full retirement. So let's say you have 28 years at a company and you decided, okay, I'm going to retire or lower your income substantially. Well, what will happen is you'll have 7 years of that new income, either 0 or whatever smaller amount it is that you're earning, working part-time, to equal the 35 highest earnings years. So that is a big determinant. So if you don't have high earnings for 35 years and all of a sudden you stop working or earn substantially less, that's going to start decreasing that average of those 35 years over time. And so even if you have 35 years of earnings, some of those years may be very low earnings. I mean, I look at my statement, like the first year I worked at Little Caesars when I was 16, I don't know, I made like $8,000. I don't know what I made. So those low earnings years will be averaged in if you don't replace them by higher average earning years. So that could lower your benefit as well. So you sort of get a double whammy. One, if you haven't worked the 35 years and you stop, you're going to have zeros calculated into that average that determines your benefit. Or two, if you do have 35 years and you stop working, you're going to miss out on probably some of the highest earning years that you're going to have prior to retirement. So that's a great point, Ken. And I think I even muffed that a little bit during the conversation. So our final question for today, anyway, comes from another Cynthia. Who would have thunk? 2 Cynthias listen to the show. So in her non-professional opinion, she says that Joe and Kim need to knock out that mortgage and put the monthly mortgage payment more into short-term liquidity. Now that I kind of agree with, Cynthia. I typically agree with that, but there are a couple important factors that might change how that might actually be planned out. Well, the first factor is, and the big one is, that they're looking currently to move at retirement age. So this isn't going to be their forever house. This is a house that they're looking to move as soon as they retire, whether that's going to be next year or a few years from now. So that might change the equation as to whether you start plowing money into paying off that mortgage. And some of that decision, Cynthia, actually comes to your next statement you say, is that they do not have enough cash to ride out market downswings. So if you look at their balance sheet, they have about $48,000 in an emergency fund, which is a pretty healthy emergency fund, I think. And they have about $164,000 in taxable or tax-free accounts. So those are fairly good amounts relative to most people. But if Joe was able to retire, say, next year at age 55, we're going to have a very long period of time from age 55 or 56 until, say, full retirement age 66, where they're going to have to draw from somewhere for their lifestyle. So this emergency fund and these taxable or tax-free cash investments could very quickly be depleted, which means they would have to start accessing their tax-deferred assets a lot sooner. And that could quickly spiral down depending on how much they draw on those tax-deferred assets. And it's going to shorten the time frame on whether they're going to be able to let that money grow or not. That being the case, if they were really motivated at retiring earlier, rather than pay off the mortgage, one of the levers they might use is really to ramp up their after-tax savings, even if it was at the expense of tax-deferred savings. Now, I'm not saying that they do that, but that's a lever you can pull, because any monies that you're deferring now, let's say in Kim and Joe's instance, it's not going to have a huge time frame because they're going to end up having to touch their tax-deferred assets very quickly if he does retire very early. So the benefits of that tax deferral really diminish or almost go away because that timeline gets so tight. So maybe they slow down their tax-deferred savings, but then also goes to your point on the house and the mortgage, Cynthia, is, yeah, they could pile a ton of money into paying off that mortgage, but that's going to put a strain on them being able to build up some of these after-tax assets. Now, I don't know the answer, but I'm just looking at a framework for how you might think of some of these things. Now, her next comment is, so sorry to say, Joe needs to work a while longer, unless they want to par back to a more modest lifestyle, and maybe they do. And then she mentions one well-known retirement guru claims he only needs $600,000 in a nest egg and a paid-for home, and it makes him about $24,000 a year. Well, kudos to him if he lives off of $24,000 a year. But that's quite a decrease in lifestyle, probably for Kim and Joe, and probably for 99.99999% of the rest of us. Now, I get the minimalist lifestyle. If that is where you find happiness in life, God bless you. Here are some issues I see with that approach to thinking about things. Number one is, just because it's possible doesn't make it desirable for almost anybody. Sure, it's possible. A lot of things are possible. The other big risk there is, okay, let's say they do that. They cut their lifestyle down to the bone and they live on next to nothing, but they're happier with less. Here's where I see some of the biggest issues with that approach for anybody. Is number one is probably the biggest risk that you're incurring is that you are risking not making hay while the sun is shining, not earning income while you're still healthy and able and engaged and connected. That's a big issue because the ability to earn income, whether that's from 50 to 60 or 60 to 70, while you're still able, you still have energy, especially if you can do it on your own terms, where it's not so binary of on or off, gives you some really big benefits because you're still going to be well connected and you're going to want to maintain social connections. Work can do that. You're going to still have marketable skills. Your skills are going to be relevant in whatever marketplace when you're in your 50s and 60s. You're still going to have some energy to be able to work and enjoy work. And if you can do that more on your own terms where you have some time freedom, it's going to go a long way in protecting yourself. So I say protecting yourself. What do I mean? Well, it goes back to that make hay while the sun shines. That income that you earn when you have the ability and the energy to do it can protect yourself when you're 70, 80, or 90 years old, when your network is antiquated or gone, your skills are out of date, and your energy level is low. When life happens to someone, then when those things occur, they have no flexibility to influence or control their situation. So by making hay while the sun shines, even if you don't need it today, it can be a great benefit in protecting yourself from unknown risks of life happening later on. And that's an extremely important point, I think, because we all worry about long-term care. We all worry about longevity. We all worry about these things that we can't forecast or have control over right now. Well, one of the big things you can do is stop thinking binary. And when you do retire, quote unquote retire, it's not like an off switch. You still make hay while the sun is shining, but you do it more on your own terms so you can preserve assets to take care of yourself later on when you may not have the option. So keep sending me your comments and questions on Kim and Joe's retirement plan live, and we'll share some of those comments and I'll respond to them next week so we can keep this conversation going. And then that will work us up to the March 1st. I'm changing the date by one date. I didn't check my schedule. Wednesday, March 1st is going to be the live results webinar. I'll make sure everybody knows about the update. The only way you're going to get access to be able to watch live or watch the replay, because we will have a replay, the results webinar where we'll walk through their entire plan. I'll show you the analysis. If it's not possible, Kim and I will negotiate a solution right there on the webinar so you can hear them prioritize, and then we'll stress test it against the 5 most common retirement risks. And then ultimately, you'll get a copy of the analysis for Kim and Joe, but you're only going to get that if you're on the live webinar. And the only way to be on the live webinar is through signing up for 6 Shot Saturday. So if you haven't done that, go to rogerwhitney.com and put in your email and your first name. Now, let's get on to our Smart Sprint and that in case of emergency plan we've been working on.
On your marks, get set.
Hey, welcome to the Smart Sprint segment where we take a little baby step to planning a better future and being intentional about our financial planning. Now, last week I asked you to start organizing your usernames and passwords for all of the different internet sites that you have to log into. That's a really important thing to do because in generations past, when someone passed away, what you would do is you'd get the post office box to forward the mail, and that's how you found out what type of assets someone had by getting the account statements. Well, so much is paperless nowadays that you ain't going to get it that way. So if you were to become incapacitated or, God forbid, pass away, your loved ones would have to access your bank accounts, your brokerage accounts, your 401k accounts, your insurance accounts, all the accounts that you log into to transact business or check balances. How are they going to do that? Are you going to say, well, the username is my first name and the password is password? Have at it. No, you don't want to do that because we got cybersecurity to worry about. We're supposed to have very complex passwords. So how are we going to get all this information to them? Now, you could create a spreadsheet. You could do it on a piece of paper. I think that's probably the majority of people that do that. But then that could be stolen. So I use 1Password. We have a gentleman, I think it's Frank, that uses LastPass, which are these online password managers. So in the next 7 days, I want you to continue to organize these username and passwords and decide on what you're going to use to do it. Now, John had a question on how safe these password managers are, which is a great question. Now, I did my due diligence, and it was comfortable enough for me to use one relative to what the options were. But to help answer John's question, I connected with the developer of 1Password and invited him on the show. So he's going to be on the show in the weeks to come, where we can talk about how these password managers work, what they can do, and to John's question, how safe are they really? But for the next 7 days, I want you to continue to organize all these assets of usernames and passwords so we can get all this stuff wrapped up in the next couple weeks. Sound like a deal? All right, go off and march. Welcome to the Happy Lab, where we noodle on how to live a happier life. A week ago, I was on a group call with a number of entrepreneurs, and we were conversing about each other's businesses. And a lady named Deb started to talk about how gruff she is with people and how she has to work on not being gruff with people because she's a hard charger executive, very go-getter kind of lady. She is super sharp. And then a friend of mine, I want to say it was Michael. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Michael. No, it was Andy. And Andy said, Deb, you need to stop telling that old story. And Deb was like, what are you talking about? And Andy said, you always talk about how rough and gruff you are, and you're not that nice. Every interaction I've had with you, Deb, over the last couple of years, you've been one of the most gracious people, one of the most giving, kind individuals I see. And when we're at events together, I see you exactly that way. I think you're telling an old story about yourself, and you need to stop. I thought that was awesome. And it made me think, we tell old stories about ourselves. I mean, if you're listening to this show, and most of us are in our 50s or 60s, we've been through a lot, right? There are a lot of things that we didn't like about ourselves and probably a lot of things that we worked to improve on. I know for me, thinking about what Andy said and really took that to heart. And I'm like, yeah, I talk about being a bad dad and being a bad husband and being grumpy. But for the most part, those are all old stories. Those are stories about the old Roger because over the last 10 plus years, I've worked really hard at being a much better father, at being a much better husband, at being a positive, happy guy, not grumpy guy. But I still see myself that way in a lot of ways. So I tell that story outwardly over and over again. And I've been called out on things like that before, but that's a story that is an old version of Roger. I need to stop telling that story. So for you, what is an old story that you tell about yourself that's no longer true that you need to put away because that's not the person you are anymore. Put that person away, charge forward, being happy with the person you are today because you should be proud of that. Hey, I want to thank you for listening to the Retirement Answer Man show today. Each week, we talk about a lot of nuances of dreaming up your ideal retirement, organizing your financial resources, figuring out how to invest your resources, and putting together the pieces in place so you can start walking towards a retirement that you're excited about and you feel like you have some control over. All the stuff we're talking here, you can take and you can make big impacts on your journey to a great retirement. But if you're looking to take that to a whole new level and have someone that's walking that journey with you, I am currently accepting traditional clients to do that with. So if you would like to have a conversation to see if we might be a fit to work together, go to rogerwhitney.com, click on Work with Roger. There's a small form there, and we can have a quick conversation to see if this is right for you. Until next week, this is Roger Whitney, the Retirement Answer Man.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.